guys, Calxiyn here, and if you guys enjoy this video, remember that you guys should join our Patreon to support the channel, get access to our Discord server, get early access to our videos, and to request topics for us to cover on the channel. So this is a new series that I've been wanting to introduce for a while that I have decided to call Problems, Praise, and Possibilities, which will serve as our new sort of character analysis videos, and whereas the title suggests, we will talk about the problems with the character, the things to praise about that character, and the future possibilities for that character. Hunter and I are going to start today with RWBY, the main character from RWBY, the Rooster Teeth animated series. I've wanted to make a video about her character for a long time now, so let's get started. You guys will also see one for Miraculous Ladybug. I did one about Adrian, so this is going to be something that is reoccurring. So first, let's start with the problems. Some of the problems with RWBY, I think, are evident to regular RWBY viewers. Like, even though RWBY has grown up, she hasn't gotten the same development as the other members of her team, such as Weiss, Blake, Yang. And for Blake, it may be for the worse sometimes, but that's a whole other video. I think the problem is with RWBY is that she's starting to stagnate or become static. There's like an inkling of development that I think has been dropped, but it hasn't been expanded upon. Like, some ideas are that RWBY fears Salem, and she expresses this to Oscar, right? You know, there's a lack of questioning in terms of her silver eye power, which may be related to that, and there's a relationship that she has with her mother that hasn't really been developed, but we have heard about in Red Like Roses. So I think that the biggest problem with RWBY is that there are inklings of things going on, but they haven't really been expanded upon enough that we don't really know what the depth is of those things, of those concepts. And I think that they deserve to be covered in depth, and I think that is our biggest problem, and I want to talk about how to fix these in the possibility section of our video, but there's something else that Hunter brought up while writing the script that I didn't even sort of think about. So Hunter, if you wanna talk about that.
Atta girl. They call you Captain Transition.
Well,
I think the issue with RWBY is, I guess, sort of paradoxically, her lack of flaws. Like, there are many ways in which a character can be enjoyable. Like, Bugs Bunny is still fun because he's goofy, and not because of his tragic heroin addiction or
tragic
whatever
drug
flaws.
Backstory.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Which, I mean, yeah, you know, he was big in show business and he probably did a little coke, but a fun show needs a fun character to drop into situations and blow shit up. For the first two seasons of RWBY, which is like the let's have fun and blow shit up seasons, they had that. You could drop RWBY in a street or cafeteria and fun would be had, like just that random cafeteria fight scene. That could only really realistically happen with a few characters, and it would make sense that something like that would happen to RWBY. Her blend of unbridled innocent enthusiasm and dorkiness and tenacity worked very well for what the show RWBY was. Issues with her character only became issues when the nature of the show changed. After the dramatic tonal shift that occurred in the third season, the character of RWBY never satisfyingly experienced the characteristic shift that has been offered to her. In the beginning, she was ignorant and ill-prepared for the realities of becoming a huntress. You know, she idolized this vague idea of a huntress without accepting...
Fairy tale idea.
Yeah, without accepting what it really meant to be one. And then the fall of Beacon happened, and she was forced to grow out of this ignorance. That could be the inner flaw of which she has to conquer. This has amazing potential for a character arc for RWBY, but the writings simply haven't delivered on that second half of RWBY's development. Like, when you think of all the moments RWBY was her old, innocent self, you can think of a lot of those moments from the first season. But when you think about...
Even the first arc, if you want to call it that, volumes 1 to 3,
arc,
right?
Now think of the moments where RWBY felt like she needed to conquer those development traits to become a leader that could survive like a proper huntress. There really weren't many. Like,
yeah.
She brings up how it hurt her that Penny and Pyrrha died, but she never blames herself for it, really, and never challenges her faults, and never really starting her development, because she has to acknowledge that she is not good enough to really change as a character, to develop from an innocent to a badass, for lack of a better word. And I feel like it's only going to exacerbate the issue Because it feels as though RWBY is not the leader anymore. It is Ozpin, and before that it was Crow that was the leader. And it means that she's not really forced to improve as a leader.
Yeah, she kind of has the adults helping now, right? And so before, right, they were sneaking off into Mountain Glen and doing all this stuff on their own.
And she was the leader.
And that's what I want to praise about the show, is that she starts off as childish, right? And wanting to sort of, you know, show up and, like, show up the others, right? She's like, oh, I can handle this, right? With the Nevermore and all that. But she comes into her own later and, like, sort of tells Jean, like, hey, we can't do that anymore because we're leaders, right? Like, she goes from someone who's antisocial to such an extent and unwilling to work with others into a position that has been given to her by Ozpin. And it may have happened a little too fast for my liking, but I think with the limited time RWBY had at the beginning, they did what they could, right? Like, seeing RWBY go from someone very awkward and someone very, I guess, lacking in certain social areas where you need to be a leader. And we've talked about what's made good leadership. We've done leadership analysis videos, right? Like, it's good to see her take control of the team, right, when it does happen. And it's nice throughout all this that, you know, RWBY does keep a youthful optimism. And some people have complained, like, Yang is being too doom and gloom, but I think personally I don't mind that because it's understandable, right? But with RWBY, she's the light in the darkness, so to speak. And it's nice to have the show take a darker tone, yet have a hopeful spark. Because Hunter did say it took a dramatic tonal shift. But RWBY realizing her faults doesn't necessarily mean that she has to lose that light, if that makes sense, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I think that before Volume 4, everything was fine, I guess. Like, as Hunter mentioned, RWBY's character only really became an issue after, because the show took such a huge shift, and it shifted with Weiss and Yang. Like, they went through a huge shift, and so to see RWBY get left behind is odd. You know what I mean? Like, it's contrasting to a point where it's like they're not in the same show anymore. I guess, like, RWBY belongs back in the other volume while Weiss and Yang have, you know, outgrown, I guess, almost. But, I don't know. I feel like that it's nice and refreshing to have her as a character because she is the optimist. You know what I mean? But at the same time, there's a way to do it, and that's what I kind of want to talk about, like, for our possibilities thing. Like, it was good before, it hasn't been good lately, but there's still time to fix it. And I think there's a way to keep her personality without making her angsty or, like, depressed or doom and gloom sort of thing, without sacrificing character development. Because I think there's been enough setup through Volume 4 and 5 to really establish the things that I spoke about earlier, to fix RWBY's development issues. If these things are expanded upon in Volume 6, I think that Volume 4 and 5 will be seen more as a slow burn in terms of her characterization and not them being too lazy to develop her. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the show's not finished yet, and a lot of us do jump to, oh, they did this, and that's, you know, like, that's super bad or whatever. But we have to remember that things are in sort of an arc, right? Like, this may be a beginning of an arc that will have payoff later. And it's just, right now we can't see the payoff because obviously the entire thing's not out yet. Like, it's not like a one-series book, I guess, or a one-issue book where throughout the entire book, you know, you get the setup, the payoff, whatever. It's more really like a giant book. You know what I mean? That may not be the best analogy, but it is like surpassing levels of trilogy, I guess you could say. Right, and so now I think people are noticing the issues, but I think this could be the beginning of a new character arc, and what we see as slow characterization now could be recontextualized later depending on Volume 6. And I think that something that should happen is that, like, she talks about this in the manga, that RWBY was like, why did I want to be a huntress again? I said I wanted to be normal, right? This isn't normal, you know? She struggles with choosing a life of normalcy and the life of a hero, and that should be something that she struggles with now in Volume 6, and it should have been shown right away in Volume 1 that RWBY was having second thoughts, because it was shown in Volume 1 of the manga, right? That's when the manga takes place. But I feel like that RWBY could almost be having a Raven issue, that Raven cowered after seeing what Salem could do, and RWBY could almost experience those same conflicted feelings, and this would not necessarily come out of nowhere since, you know, she expresses to Oscar, and now seeing that horrifying image of Salem, she could be really pushed into her fear, right? and the relationship with her mother that's talked about in Red Like Roses Part 2. And that's one of the problems with RWBY. It has all these development in really weird places where it's not in the show. Like in the manga, in the songs, you know, it's all somewhere else. And that's not how it should be, if that makes sense. Like, I don't mind the songs, and I don't mind the manga as extended lore. But it should be put into the show, right? And that's, I guess, something I should have said in the problems thing, but it's something that I only thought of, like, right this second. Like, it's sort of a matter of, these things should serve to help you, like the songs, to expand upon things that have already been talked about, not to add things, because then you have sort of this divided fan base that has halfsies of different information. You know what I mean? And Kingdom Hearts had this problem for a while, because all these games were on a bunch of these platforms, and, like, the fandom wasn't necessarily as connected as it is now, like, in terms of, like, you know, the internet back then and whatever. And so everybody had this weird information and everyone was confused. That's kind of how I feel. Not everybody gets the manga. Not everybody cares about the soundtrack. You don't, right? And so
Not
it's like,
even remotely.
You have an imaginary conversation between RWBY and her mother where her mom doesn't want her to follow this path, right? Obviously, her mom's not real in that song. Like, RWBY doesn't know what her mother would say, so that could be RWBY's inner thoughts. Like, that her mother would tell her not to do this, and that could be her making her feel better. And you have RWBY, like, feeling like she's abandoned. Like, don't y'all think that's important? You know what I mean? Like, RWBY has abandonment issues because her mom ran off and died being a huntress, and that could be affecting RWBY, that she could be, like, either, I don't want my mom's sacrifice to be in vain, so I'll continue it. Or it's like, if my mom were still alive, she would tell me not to do this, so I shouldn't do. Like, there's all these things that you could do that RWBY could feel too scared to continue, and if she remembers the fate of her mother, that imaginary conversation could come back and she could talk herself out of it. And that flicker of light in the darkness, you know, what I mentioned, RWBY's optimism could be challenged here, and that would make things very interesting, right? And there's that other thing that Hunter said. She's not the leader anymore, and that bothers me a little bit. And I think a possibility to fix it would be to put her back in a leadership position where Oscar has to sort of take a step back, maybe, because Ironwood isn't necessarily going to trust that this random kid is Ozpin, but he does know that these random kids are RWBY and Yang, and so she may end up being put in a position...
You're both tweens, but at least these are tweens with shotguns that I know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he may not necessarily trust the whole Oscar stuff, and so it's like, I can't come with you guys, or I can't necessarily be with you guys in the same capacity. It's up to you guys. That gives RWBY the control back, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about is... The reason why she didn't ask Ozpin about the Silver Eyes, I think, is a lack of control. That if Silver Eye warriors are destined to live the life of a hero, suddenly there's a lack of control. You can't go back to normalcy or being a normal girl or escape the same fate as your mom if this is your destiny, right? If this is written in a place where you can't undo it, you know what I mean? Like, I think that drives anybody a little crazy, like, to feel like that's enough, like, a lack of control and a lack of choice, to feel like that your life is being controlled by something else. That's enough to kind of drive anyone crazy. I think that's how a lot of us feel sometimes, like we're not in control of our lives. And so it'd be interesting if RWBY started to develop some sort of habit that she felt would give her a small amount of control. I don't know what that necessarily would be. Like, some people sort of have, like, a workout obsession. Or, you know, they'll do other things to feel like they have some sort of control over their life and their body and stuff like that, where they don't in other areas. Like, maybe RWBY would spend a lot of her time fighting or something along those lines. I don't really know, but I feel like that if she feels this lack of control and this fear in all of this stuff, like, I feel like that would give her, like, great payoff and would give her some good possibilities for her character.
I think Miles and Carries are playing the long game with RWBY. I do think that the most logical character arc for RWBY is the one I'd mentioned earlier, where she goes from innocent idea of a
fairy tale huntress life.
Idea of a huntress, and then she's faced with the reality of it, and then she either like cracks and does not succeed at being a huntress, or she has to sort of buck up and learn that her ignorance and her naivete, although, you know, still makes for fun character, was not a virtue, was something that she had to overcome. And that
maybe there's a way to be optimistic about a situation without being unrealistic.
But I think that is the obvious character arc for RWBY, and they seem to be stalled on that. Now, they are doing a lot of good work with Blake and Weiss and Yang, and we'll get into
Blake
that.
we'll talk about, because a couple people feel a little controversially about Blake.
And
I think Yang and Weiss are fine.
And a lot, well, fuck it, I like Blake too.
Okay.
So I think they've sort of made up for that, and I feel like they're stalling RWBY to work on them, but when they do get around to RWBY again, I think it will work.
I think that everything combined, like, waking up to the reality, like you said, to get rid of the, I guess, the ignorance or the naivete, like stuff that you said, right? Seeing Salem in that image that Emerald had, I think that's enough to wake her up. Like, this isn't a fairy tale anymore. This is fucking terrifying, you know what I mean? I think that's enough to kind of shake her out of sort of what you're talking about and give her some really interesting development. But anyway, this isn't even all the issues with RWBY, but we're getting into I like to make our videos 10 minutes. I don't like to go on for 30 minutes when we do videos that are like this. So there are some other things I want to talk about. This will probably be a part 1. There may be a part 2 later, and of course, as RWBY continues, there will be updates to these things to see if things have gotten better, worse, much of the same. If you guys enjoyed this video, remember that you guys should join our Discord server by becoming patrons over on Patreon. You guys can also get early access to our videos, request topics, and, you know, support the channel. And we will see you later. Bye, guys.